on speech reading. And there were 10 VIPs there. And so we demonstrated the processes of speech reading, some of which we have we've been doing all quarter. And the director of the program picked up immediately that this individual was not even trying to communicate with Elaine. And obviously when the breakthrough came, they decided it would be to their benefit to work with us, and they were great in terms of cooperating. And that's what I'm talking about, that some way I think we can work through your particular challenge also in reference to this, because there's so much discrimination going on yet. And it's a stereotype yet that people have in reference to what we're talking about. So, and there are many people helping on this. Nadine is kind of our representative too on the A.G. Bell board, and is going to be doing a lot of work in the vocational area. But let's keep this in mind. We haven't even talked about that before. Go ahead.
Is that intentional, or?
I would say yes and no.
Ignorance.
It depends. I think sometimes it's very intentional. Sometimes I like to think that in the majority of cases it is not intentional. Jeanette asked the question, is it intentional when you are dismissed or when people want to move you out of a job? I think mostly it's ignorance and lack of being able to communicate. Wouldn't you say that it's? I think people want the help; they just don't know how to go about it, and all they need to do is ask.
But
go ahead.
I was just wondering if you ever found the opposite, where your friends or family might help you too much. They might be too helpful.
Good point.
What do you have to be forceful and tell them, how you feel, or what? How do you let them know?
No, there's no problem. See, my family, I really like it. We all, as though my brother, and my brother, and my brother never treated me like that, never. And he always, but if he needs a test, he hasn't got the time to me or whatever. Both of them are very well all of the time, about no problem. But if you be a trader, or if you don't do that, about the trees, no better, you go find out to do with it. I'm a bastard. I'm okay. I'm okay. It's just so fun. They're the actors, they're these don't happen now, they never heard. Here, people, here, bad people, they better tell each other. They'll die, fucked up people, they better tell each other. They'll go after it. So, you have to buy me something. I'm trying to do something. So,
You have to be forgiving a
no,
lot.
but when I got back, I had so puppy, I had 450, and I have a big family. So, I was careful with the birthday. I got double free birthday. So, my father would be treated like a bunny. And sometimes doctor has a paper that do thick. Then it's building. And then it's violent. I'm so separate. I've been so sad with the parents don't give. Children, my parents people are physically people. Physically people. And if it's about this. I feel so sad. They're still being treated like everybody else without this disability.
Sometimes I wish my family did more. No. The only, they push me a lot, but the only indulgence that I can think of is like watching TV, and maybe I didn't catch the punchline or something, so I say, what? And my mother would repeat it for me. Well, I get married to this guy, and
I believe it.
and I'll say, what did Johnny Carson just say? What was the punchline? So wait till the commercial. I don't have one. I pride myself on not having one. No. So I've learned to listen a little more carefully. Most of the time I get it. But he's cruel.
Let's direct our attention now to philosophy and point of view and attitude for a few minutes. So would anyone like to pose a question that way in terms of how you perceive life and what it's all about? Of course, I should be, if I turn my voice off, they can get it anyway. If I turn my voice on, just Susan can't pick it up because of the back of the head. Let's deal for a few minutes now with philosophy and attitude and point of view and how we can help change the world.
I have a question I'd like to ask. It may not pertain to what Dr. Bitter just said, but I personally wanted to ask, which has to do with relating with other people. Particularly, I want to ask you, Diane. First of all, I'll mention that I have no hearing in my left ear, and so in social situations, it's sometimes difficult to have a good communication between people, or people trying to speak to you and you don't know that they're trying to talk to you. I would like to know how you would deal with a situation or that you have where there you're talking with someone and then your attention changes and focuses somewhere else, so that you're not.
Mine or theirs?
Huh?
Repeat that part again.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not talking very clearly.
Oh, you're doing fine. I just didn't hear that last part.
Okay.
You mean like what would I do in a crowded room, for example?
In a crowded room,
yeah, like a
or on a one-to-one basis with somebody else. If they come to you and say, didn't you, or they would assume you heard them about something, heard that you, or thought that you would pick up what they said.
Okay.
And you didn't.
Maybe I can answer part of it now.
Okay.
First of all, you do get lonely in certain social situations. I've been lonely at a dance, with 1,000 people there, because it's so hard for me with the band going to hear, this is in my single days, to hear someone talking to you. And that's where lip reading comes in handy, but still, it's hard. And sometimes I would just feel like leaving a party because it was just too hard to concentrate. Because the room is crowded, it's so loud in there, and deaf people don't like loud noises because it's hard to distinguish, whose voice is that, with which face, and things like that. On the other hand, and during those times, I've been called a snob or I'm stuck up because I walked right past somebody when they said hello and I didn't hear them. And, I just sometimes gave off the wrong impression in people. And that hurts later when you find out about it, that so-and-so thinks you're stuck up. And when you're, in the social scene, that bothers you. Now, it wouldn't bother me as much because I'm older, and I understand why they thought that. But most of the time, I had a good time at parties. I was just trying to concentrate on one person at a time. If it was possible to get away from the group a little bit, I try and do that. I loved going to parties for the most part. I'm trying to think of other situations that might be difficult. But basically, I'm a one-on-one person. I would have a good time at a party if we were all doing the same thing. If we were all playing a game, or if we were all dancing, and there wasn't that much talking that needed to go on. But basically, I like to be alone with one person.
How do you handle the situation in terms of when people don't seem to pay attention or they get upset when they don't hear you? Debbie and then Colleen, then we'll move to this other challenge. Go ahead, Debbie.
I think I have a problem with the group of people and people talk to each other. Det har på mig rakt upp på förståra. Den har papper på taget förståra. En som står på taget lever. Det är bara så här. Då blir det bara. Han är där så där och bara då förståra. Förlåt. Han är inte så okej. Han är då så glad för att det är fel för mig. Barnen har varit ett problem. Jag är bara faktiskt där. Jag ska bara ta över alla fel. Att det förråder för sig själva sagt nej. Men det är att tappa på det och gata bara spela.
Another thing I learned to do was not to say, what? I learned to let a lot of things go and just forget it. Most of those kinds of conversations aren't that earth-shattering.
That important anyway, aren't they?
Every time you fall, I'm trying to put out, but I'm trying. I'm not trying to think to breathe. You have to be polite, you should talk. I'm so alive to be born. So I believe you stop the answer. You be out to the conversation. I'll be out to stop the answer. But it's hard to keep up with the people going on. Well, you figure right side, or because you need to talk. Today, this is the good old I'm in the class today. It's back raining. It's tough. You have to live with it.
Do you find it sometimes hard to be able to want to be around people?
But
Do you find it hard to be around people sometimes?
To want to be around people?
Oh, yes, well I said, do you find it hard to be around people sometimes?
Hard time, no.
You see, it is much different, isn't it? Let's have Colleen go ahead and respond to this, and then we want to move for the final question on the other, so we can kind of keep within the time frame.
I gave up there was a partner that may bring it again. I get things that may perfect but what will I do? The ball, that one down, that they pass around, that they feed, question, then have it. No September, somebody that my love, some don't know. I think they did over here, but I must have hoped you, but I'm still feeling. That's why I have a problem with that. But it's so hard to do, but they don't have it about, but they don't want to be bothered with that. But I did feel different sometimes. I don't know, like I said, I have to talk about, but I haven't nothing serious. I love the dance. And what there is missing. When I piece in the dark topper, I don't know if I'm dark, high or soft. I don't know if that piece can hear me
So it's, we have to still do a lot of education. Now, this is what we're going to do at this point. We'd like them to each just respond to their philosophy of life, respond to it. What has helped you be successful? And then we'll take a break, and Kim can take care of the wires and that while you take a break of about 7 minutes or so. And then we're going to divide in 2s and 3s, small groups, and they will visit with you in your small groups for a minute. We won't video that, but we'll give you a chance to practice. Okay? Go ahead, Diane.
Okay. Just love playing philosopher. A lot of people ask me, do you know sign language? Or why don't you use it? And don't you think it would come in handy? And things like that. Of course, my parents were the ones that made the decision for me not to learn it. But along the way, I became grateful to that because I like being independent. I like being able to speak for myself. I don't like having people put their hands in my face. And I don't put that down, but it's a choice that my parents made, and it's one that I chose to keep. And one of the reasons that I feel that way is because I believe that every one of us has the potential to reach. And by being able to speak and to continue with that, I am reaching my potential. I now have conversations on the phone, mainly because of technology, that permits me to talk on the phone. But that, when I was a child, I was not able to talk on the phone. I can only talk to someone like my grandmother who spoke, who yelled into the phone. And because I decided to keep up my speech skills and not go the way of sign language, I'm able to enjoy the phone more. And I depend on it. I enjoy using it. And I'm able to be a secretary. I'm able to take minutes in a meeting because I chose to reach my potential as far as possible. I don't think I've even reached it yet. I still would like to have some speech training. I would still like to have people tell me, gee, there's not a trace of speech impediment in your voice. And so those are still challenges I'd like to reach. And if I had chosen sign language, I would have never reached the potential that I can someday attain. And it's sort of like with any other challenge we have in life, we can let them stop us, but if we overcome them, then we become better, and we're just that much more refined.
I don't use them. But I learned some of the dollars is finished. Forever on. So I was so happy with it. I'd be stubborn. Then I learned the dollars I gave the birthday. But I can really talk today. And sometimes I get very funny. Every time I was telling me what I'm saying. But that's not the time I'm sorry. But pretty please. I'll say I was pretty glad that my parents taught me to learn to speak. And to be at this apartment. Just to teach when you're smart, when you start with a baby. These days keep me a lot of dollars. But they're out in the future. These are about God, about church, or a present for the protocol. And we try to do this. People don't know how to start how to talk. Private difference. So I probably talk to the side. These are the real thing for their people. For to tell me. But I'm talking about God. The birthday of the other people for my friends. Never go out of that. So I did help me. About me calling. Instead of saying, then if I could learn to die, to start with. I will prepare someone else. I will be like a step first. I don't know if I was someone else. You started. This is the format. This is something. If I do it down, I just don't want to try. That's the step first. That's me. I'm trying to go back. I pick someone else. Just something like that. But I'm really pissed off about those. It's all about the first place. These are posts. These put the opposite feet of first of the eye. Put the stop time, put the start out. Put out of the future, put the people who are in the speed. Put out of the future that are. Now the battle started with the truth. Go. To my please. The already. He's better for my fast. Take my please.
I feel like it's dead. I'm a person, not a deaf person, but as what the ear can be open or prevent it, person got confused. But that me recognize that me, that me went through an ill other, but not to treat that person because of disability. About to treat person as a person. And have a baby McNabb didn't ministry. Baby dog that I can leave certainly if I want to I do the no. I don't want to have the dark. I love the dark. I love the kind of vibe with baby. I'm a very active in sports and everything. I feel very better. I felt that I could express my own feelings, my own independence, and my own happiness whenever I feel like that I was able to express with the other people. And I feel very good about myself. That I'm independent, that I can do anything I set my mind to. And like what I've talked about, it's very important what can anything and with the philosophy that I have. So, and I believe that each person has positive, that I put nice and right. Important, did I get that?
Potential.
Potential.
3 syllables. Potential.
Potential. Potential.
See how exciting this is in just a second or two. One can a number of syllables, and within a second, the correct pronunciation comes. So when you have never heard some of the sounds, it's exciting, isn't it? That's why teaching English and working with 3 impaired young people is so exciting.
If they have a good attitude, that's a dream to solve. They can. But if they have a different kind of attitude, like, you cannot do it. But they cannot do it. You have to build the attitude.
Okay, thank you. Let's take a break. And this will give us time to take care of the wires and so on, and they will visit with you in small groups for a few minutes, all right? And if you'd like to visit with them, otherwise too,